Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
How do you like it?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Here's Johnny!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
Welcome to The Completionists, a podcast where three lifelong friends and aspiring movie makers discuss their first shared inspiration, Mr. Stanley Kubrick. Each episode will review Mr. Kubrick's filmography, the history, the theory, and what it means to us personally, culminating in our own endeavor to create a short film using his techniques. This is The Completionists. I'm Michael Cole, and with me is Wes Wennerstrom and Patrick Brennan. We, the intro. The intro that plays tells you, what the idea is here, but, just because it doesn't say our names, I figured we would mention that, so...
Could we be the, Roman names for this one? Because of Spartacus? I could be Wessus Wenestrimicus or something, and you could be Micus Coleus, and Pat could be Patricus Brennicus.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Or we could all be Spartacus, I guess.
Yes. Well, I am Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus, guys.
All right, so let's dive right in with... You want to do it in order? I kind of...
Yeah, let's do it in order. Yeah.
So, The Killing. Had both of you seen The Killing before?
Yeah, I had.
I saw The Killing once before. I watched it again 2 times for this.
Okay.
But I saw it way back, way back, and I vaguely remembered it. I remember the horse,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So this was my first time with all 3 of these movies. And The Killing, after, I enjoyed some of the stuff from the shorts and the semi-features. The Killing was, okay, we're finally here. We're finally in good movie territory. My only complaint about The Killing was that the narration, and then I read in the trivia that the studio made Kubrick do that because they thought it was too confusing otherwise, and that Kubrick hated the narration. I'm like, well, yeah, the narration was terrible. Yeah. So
it's not great, but it's not so intrusive that it takes away from a lot.
No.
Right.
And I liked one of the things that he did with the narration to basically say fuck you to the studio was that the narration isn't accurate at a couple of points. So it just sounds like it sounds like a what do you call it? The unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
But to it's just he's just wrong. There's no device there for it. It's just but it kind of builds that vibe still. And that was because he's like, I don't want to do this, so I'm not going to do it right.
That's cool. I didn't even notice that part.
Yeah, me either.
So one thing that I wanted to talk about that I really liked about this movie was the guy who is the horse shooter character.
Carrie.
Yeah. He is to me, and this is just me guessing here, but everybody else is very much pre-Marlon Brando acting in this, and he seems like he's trying to be Marlon Brando. And he's, you know what I mean? I'm not saying he's doing a Marlon Brando impression, but everybody else is doing the transatlantic accent, and they're doing, the thing, and he's like, listen here, buddy, it's not, and you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
and it works to some extent for me, I thought. That's not a complaint, that's more like this is a real weird performance in the rest of this movie.
Yeah.
But it's not bad.
Yeah, he was a really interesting actor. He's in Paths of Glory too, of course. And
Paths of Glory 2? I didn't.
Yes. He was known for being a real wild card, not necessarily a crazy person on set, but he would improvise. He would do kind of, things that weren't kind of de rigueur at the time. And he went on to have like a career as like an underground filmmaker, and was kind of just like had this kind of like cult following for the rest of his life. And I think it kind of started in these two films where he kind of got noticed.
Yeah, so when we get to Paths of Glory in a few minutes, I have more to talk about with him, because I read about his antics in Paths of Glory, but like he definitely is doing something different than the rest of the guys in that movie. Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that we wanted to introduce with this with the series is to kind of simplify everything. Is we're going to do a 1-sentence review for each of the movies that we do throughout the rest of the series. So Pat, if you want to do your 1-sentence review for The Killing.
Sure. Let's see. The human mess gets in the way of even the best laid plans.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, I am. This is like this statement's absolutely got to be incorrect, but this is the earliest heist movie I've ever seen. So, like, is this one of the? I mean, I know that The Great Train Robbery is considered a heist movie, but like not in the way that we think of a heist movie by modern standards. Do you think that this would be like the one of the first? This is 5 to 10 years before the like big. String of them with Ocean's movie and Ocean's 11 and
Ocean's
Rafifi
11
and
1960 was Ocean's 11.
Yeah, and this is 56. So it is it. Do you? It's the earliest I've seen, so maybe I'm wrong, but
I just don't know a lot about this age in cinema. I don't know what the precursor to The Killing was, or if The Killing was a precursor to Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
It certainly does.
I know Asphalt Jungle was a big influence on this, and big influence on Kubrick at the time. It's been a long time since I'd seen Asphalt Jungle, and I don't know if it was actually a heist film. I know it's like a noir, so I can't really speak to that. I would doubt that it's the first, but I think it's probably pretty early in the development of the heist film, and like you said, it would kind of become like a bigger thing in the late 50s and 60s.
I thought this movie was hilarious. I mean, it had so many good laughs in it. The relationship between George and I think Sophie, is that her name? His wife?
I forget her. Yeah.
Down somewhere.
Sarah at one point said to me, because she isn't really aware of what Kubrick makes, so she heard me watching it, and she said, "Are you watching It's a Wonderful Life?" And I was like, "No." And she goes, "Oh, it sounds like it, because they're just like, George."
Yeah, but I thought that relationship was really funny too, and that so much of this plot holds, it like kind of hinges around a cuckolding, like just that sort of thing. It's not something you saw a lot in those movies, at least not as explicitly as you did here, and it works. It really does work for like both dramatic and comedic effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It's got a very pulpy feel to it.
Yeah, and the jumping around in time, I read, was a big inspiration for Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. Wes, when you were saying like you're not that familiar with this time period of cinema, there are some people who would say that the 50s were a great time in cinema, but most people of our taste would argue that the 50s are not a very good time. That like Quentin Tarantino said, the 50s and the 80s are like the two worst times in cinema history, and I obviously there's always there's good movies in every era, but the 50s had a lot of like, I think 50s had maybe a lot more of an acting revolution, but storytelling and directing wise, I don't think we were seeing much of that. So, because this is the era when Brando and James Dean were coming out. So
yeah,
gotcha.
I think it's kind of an interesting decade because I think it's similar to the 80s, and I don't know if I agree that they're like the worst decades, but they're really transitional decades, like because you go from these like, the big studio, like Hollywood at its greatest in the 40s, and then the 60s you have this just like revolution in cinema. And then the 50s is you have those like seeds of that revolution happening, but you're still kind of stuck in that Hollywood system. And I think the 80s is sort of the same way, where there's all this big like post Star Wars, post Annie Hall studio stuff going on, and then the 90s is just like all this independent stuff, but that's all going on underground, or a little under the surface in the 80s. And there's so much great stuff there, but you have to dig for it rather than
right. Yeah, I mean, those were two very socially conservative decades. So Reagan era, and then I forget the president, Eisenhower maybe, but
Eisenhower during
the 50s were just they're the 50s.
Right.
Like we don't need to elaborate on it. They were extremely socially conservative.
Right. Yeah. But there's that tension of people coming.
It's just funny because when we talk about Spartacus, that's a big changing point in the studio system, even the movie Spartacus. So I guess we'll get to that.
Yeah. But I was going to say, the social conservative thing is interesting. This movie, a little bit of it's a little risque in points, but like going into the next two, I was really surprised at what they were able to do, given the level of success that they were getting. Because like I'm aware of later Kubrick and and the fact that he got pretty out there with his content, with what he could put out there. But I'm good with transitioning to the next movie if you guys are. I want to
unless
we don't need to go that fast. We can. I don't know if you want.
I just because I want to talk Paths of Glory. Well, the other thing is that you did a good job picking 3 movies to go together, Wes, because this movie, The Killing got him the job for Paths of Glory, because Kirk Douglas saw The Killing and was like, that guy should direct my next movie, and gets him Paths of Glory. And
that's a good point, because a lot of directors and actors saw this movie and were like, whoa, this guy's the next wave, so he really caught a lot of critical attention for this one, and attention within like the movie making community.
And again, with like we said on the last episode, for the time period, the cinematography is it's so clear,
clean
in a way that I mean, you see black and white like that now when they make a black and white thing. You did not see black and white like that at the time. Those cameras, they weren't able to get the detail in your eyes, like, the way that he was able to, and they weren't able to get all that. And, the cinematography was this wasn't a huge step forward for him. This was him staying consistent in that way, and then kind of going, okay, the editing and the sound and all the other things in my last couple things were a bit lackluster, and this finally catches up, I feel like, in those ways.
There's one scene where George is like kind of pleading with Sherry, and just the light on his eyes and just like how it's like lighting up his expression is just like, it's just beautiful. You could pause it and just kind of look at it.
I agree.
I really like the way that they shot the racetrack. I thought that was like, there's this kind of tension in it where it's times like very grimy and dark and kind of claustrophobic, but then it goes out into a different area and it's just bright and exposed, and it gives you this sense of like both that claustrophobia and then like almost like an alienation, and it feels so good for that like trying to pull off a heist kind of feeling of like, I'm being watched, I'm in a tight situation, and like those two conflicting emotions.
I want to talk about the horse race itself, or not the final one that they show, but the first one that they show is so interesting because the intensity with which you would have had to like you've got that, it's a zoom lens, and he's got it pretty consistently on that front horse, and there is no way that he's faking that. You know what I mean? Like this isn't like right now we could do a CGI horse so that we can get a perfect, like, keep it in frame shot. So and you could tell by the framing of the shot and the focal range and stuff that he's a ways back with a zoom lens, and he follows it like so smoothly. Like you would have a hard time doing that with today's technology, and the camera back then is probably twice as big as your average camera now, and you have gimbals, and you have, literally you can set A to B points and time frames, and so and I don't think you could get that smooth of a shot, and so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, especially at the budget he was working at, like maybe in a big studio production, he could, they would have access to tools and stuff like that. He didn't have access to any of that stuff. He was doing this. What I love about the films of this era is like stuff like that. It's like Kubrick, as we know him, is very like controlled, very, like has control over every piece of the process. Here he's just sort of like figuring it out, and it kind of has this, he's still in control, but it feels a little bit like rougher than his later work.
I just have written down here, $5,000 for rubbing out a horse.
Yeah.
I figured you'd like that one, Mike. All right, ready to move on.
Yep. Paths of Glory. So, to our audience, I haven't quite finished Spartacus, right? So I just want to give that like disclaimer right now. Paths of Glory is my favorite so far. I mean, Spartacus is excellent so far too, but to start with Paths of Glory, of these three, I thought it was the closest to what I expect from Kubrick.
Totally, yeah.
Because he's finding his footing with the killing. He is there, like the fact that I don't know what the set structure was to have those trenches, like, but having the tracking shots through the trenches in 1950, was that 57 that movie came out?
Yeah.
There had to be a massive structure for that, and then you have tracking shots, and I don't remember seeing tracking shots that far back that were any kind of
and they weren't on tracks. I mean, they were just walking through the trenches,
right?
So
right, but so I don't know, but it was so smooth and without a loss in photo quality. Like, I mean, some of those shots, I was like, Jesus, I'm watching, and I'm sure when I'm watching on Tubi, it's probably probably not the greatest digital, not remake, but transition. And so there is stuff that I think might be like there's film noise, and there's probably a little bit of just digital noise depending on at what point in the digital time frame that was transitioned over. But it like nothing that we make is going to have a picture quality that good. You know what I mean? Like nothing that we're going to be shooting for our film is going to look that good with that smooth of, and I thought, okay, this is crazy. And then the movie is completely not what I expected at all. That was the other thing.
Yeah, it's actually based on a true story, and I'm going to try to find that.
I didn't realize. I knew it was based on a novel. I didn't realize the novel was based on a true story. I had heard lots of stories of people getting executed for cowardice in World War One, but I didn't know that there was a specific story.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. I think this is. I mean, I'll even go so far as I've seen most of his movies relatively recently. I think this is like one of his top 5 films ever.
Yeah.
I think he it's fully mature, which is really interesting at this stage of his career. And the tracking shots, I think they're Max Ophuls, I don't remember where Max Ophuls is from, but that director is the only filmmaker I think before that was doing, tracking shots like this, and he was a big influence on Kubrick. But I think you're right, having them in that like trench, and it added this level of difficulty to this, but it doesn't feel like that. And there's also this contrast that I really love between the trenches and the dirtiness of the trenches and the direness of the trenches, and this beautiful estate that where all the other action takes place, the trial, etc. And that is such a it's like a theme of the film in itself, that I think that's one of the things that would become sort of something Kubrick does, is having the visuals indicate the themes without necessarily speaking to them. So that, like, the idea of class really comes through in that, and you don't really get that as much in the actual dialogue or anything like that.
No, and it's I was surprised. If you guys have probably seen a version of All Quiet on the Western Front, right?
Yeah, it's been a long time, but yeah.
Okay, I've seen the original, the 33 version or whatever, and that was it's an anti-war World War I movie from the side of the Germans. But but I also always realize that, like, when I think about that movie, is it was made pre-World War II. And so, like, our mentality about World War One did change after World War II in so many other movies. Like, there's so many movies where it's very clear that the director or the writer is like, well, these are just proto-Nazis. Like, these are going to be Nazis. And, like, that's just not the historical... That's not really what's going on there. Right. And so, like, you lose some sense of that. And then to have, like, an anti-war movie, again, after we're out of World War I, World War II is not really in anybody's sight in 1933. Having an anti-war movie is one thing. But at this point in history, we've just finished World War II 10 years earlier, where we've done Korea, and we're probably already, like, on the verge of Vietnam, or getting, like, France is in Vietnam already at this point. And the U.S. isn't completely out of the Vietnam, and we're fully in the Cold War at that point. And so, like, to be anti-war at that, is such, I have not seen anything from that. Like, I think you have to get almost to the 70s again to see, or maybe the late 60s, anti-war stuff. Yeah. But, and I thought that was just really intense social, and for it to be a big name actor, and, I know that Kubrick was not a big name director, but, like, for it to have to be successful at the level that it was is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it had the reach of just a, like, kind of a modern day independent film. But it did make a splash because France banned it. It was based on a real life scenario that happened in northern France in World War I versus the Germans, where a corporal really did try to bomb his own trenches to get people out to attack this hill, and it was a total disaster. So it was banned in France, and then another kind, I think Spain maybe, because of Franco.
Yeah, Franco banned it in Spain.
Yep, and then all the American military bases they wouldn't show it at. So it's not like it had a huge cultural reach, but at least the military establishment was aware of it.
Yeah.
And man, we talked about the tracking shots through the trenches, but the scene where they're rushing the anthill, I was trying to think of how did they even do this, because it's just looks so realistic.
It does, and part of the way they shot that scene, not that it added to the realism, but it may have been the Jaws thing where we don't have a working shark, so we have to shoot around it. The guy that Pat and I were talking about earlier, he was fired. He's in the movie a bunch. He was fired because he pretended that he was kidnapped to try to get, like, paparazzi buzz. And when they realized that he did that, they were like, "Well, fuck you, you're fired." And they had already shot all the stuff we do see of him. So, like, in that scene, he's supposed to be one of the three guys that we see, and they kind of have to shoot it chaotic so that we can't see it's not really him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, and going off of that, I mean, I thought his, another story about him, the fact that when he was supposed to be going to the, to the firing squad, he was supposed to be completely silent. And I feel like this is a rarity with Kubrick. Like, he improvised that, he started crying, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. That was just his choice to do that. And Kubrick liked it so much they left it in because I feel like that is clearly the right decision for him, because you have Ralph Meeker being the stoic one, you have Joe Turkel being half dead already, so like getting that contrast, I think that was just like a great instinct from him.
That's an arresting scene. I think my wife walked in while I was watching the film, and she was just watching it like, "Oh my god, it's horrible."
It's such a brutal scene too. Like it's so like plaintive, and it doesn't really play it up and stylistically at all. It's just sort of like they get shot and they're just slump, There's like this moan, and it's just it kills you.
Really
I kept expecting them to get a last minute pardon. And that's the other, that's kind of one of the cool things about when you get a good filmmaker who's not going to give you the bow on the end of the movie, is that it will genuinely take you by surprise. So I was just expecting, because I'm like, well, we already saw the setup for this, like where the guy comes in and goes, where Kirk Douglas says, I have sworn affidavits saying. And I was like, okay, they're gonna pardon these guys. It's gonna happen. There's gonna be something. There's gonna be some kind of backroom deal here. And then you get them shot, and you're like, Jesus, I didn't, I was not expecting that.
You think you're gonna get like Sergeant Rutledge or The Great Escape or something like that, like kind of like a rousing kind of thing, and you don't. You don't get that at all.
It's similar to. You've both seen Inglourious Bastards?
Long time ago,
When I first saw Inglourious Bastards, we know what happens to Hitler, and you just get that expectation. And so when the movie ends, and you're just like, oh shit, they Swiss cheesed Hitler, like what the hell, like it really takes you out, like, oh fuck, like and this did that, because I really was like, this this is Kirk Douglas brought him in. This is going to be more mainstream than what I expect from Kubrick, at least in this way, and it was, I really was shocked, and it was a creepy scene to watch.
It's really disturbing, even for such an old film. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of other things that have really disturbed me, like maybe the movie Hereditary, with the decapitation. That was like, oh my god, and this was kind of on that level for me, just in terms of how uncompromising it was, and how angry the hypocrisy made me. It's just a lot of pathos in when watching the film.
One of the things I kind of going off of that, like one of the things I really like about this is, especially looking at it for the rest of Kubrick's career, there's so many lines in this movie that if they were in Doctor Strangelove, they would be hilarious. But here they are like dark, scary lines. Like there's, I have a few written down.
Interesting take.
I'm serious. Like
I'm excited to hear these.
Like there's a line. If it was impossible, the only evidence would be their dead bodies in the trenches. Like if you were hearing George C. Scott saying that in Doctor Strangelove, you'd be like, "That's such a funny, dark line." Here, it's just like, "Oh my god, did you just say that?" Or what was it? I feel like I have. Even like the things like. The men died wonderfully. Like it's got that like irony to it.
That part was maybe the most disturbing to me, was when the two generals were talking afterwards, and he was like, "What a marvelous show." Yeah. Sometimes they put a bad taste in the mouth of and I was like, Jesus Christ, dude.
Right.
If my death better put a bad taste in the mouth of the people who watched it willingly. Right.
Yeah, but there's so many things that, like, there's this sense of irony that if you played it slightly differently, you could see how Kubrick made Doctor Strangelove out of such a dire thing as the end of the world, very real possibility of the end of the world.
Yeah.
He could have done that here too, but it probably would have been a much worse movie.
Yeah, This could not be comedic.
Yeah.
Like, I can't think of a moment in this movie that I thought was funny at all.
No.
Yeah, it's not funny, but it's not like it's not clever either.
Right. It's
Like it's a really like I said, uncompromising kind of economical film that really elicits strong emotions, and it's well shot, well acted, and well scripted.
Yeah. And the relationships are really interesting in that like kind of clever way where it's not just these chain of command kind of things, which would make it, I think, a little less interesting, but there's a sense of like manipulation that runs through it. Even from the start, I forget the general's names, but like the lead general talking to convinces the guy beneath him to invade the anthill by hinting that he would get promoted. Those sort of things that he's manipulating them, and he's manipulating Kirk Douglas. It's just this sense of manipulation rather than just you obey my orders. That comes later when he gets embarrassed.
Yeah. The guy, what was the guy's name? Tim Carey? Is that what it?
Yeah, Timothy Carey.
He, when you were talking about him improving, Kubrick, one of the reasons why Kubrick liked it was because it was driving Kirk Douglas mad, like crazy. Okay. And he thought that Kirk Douglas's performance was better because he was irritated all the time. So it was interesting. It was a foreshadowing of the horror that he's going to inflict on what's her face that plays Wendy. Oh God. Yeah. So like
Shelley Duvall.
Yeah.
Oh man, I watched The Shining recently, and I think my next tattoo is going to be Shelley Duvall's face from The Shining, and just text that says, "Loser has to keep America clean."
Yeah, I love that line.
A man fighting for what's right in a situation in which nobody wants to do what's right.
Mm-hmm. Very good. We could segue into Spartacus with my one-liner if you'd like. So I have one that's accurate and then one that's very wry. Which one do you want to hear?
Let's go wry.
Or both.
Yeah. Let's do both.
Okay. So the accurate one is not the movie that made his career, but the movie that guaranteed his career. Spartacus was a commercially successful, if artistically thin film that gained as much as it lost from being generated in the Hollywood studio system. And then my wry one is Spartacus is something like a decent family restaurant in suburbia with Gordon Ramsay as his pastry chef.
I think that
Wonk.
I think that while I 100% have things that I was going to say that were similar, I think you might be giving it a little more shit than it deserves, but I think that
I guess
I think that I had the same thought of like, oh, this movie does not at all feel like a Kubrick film. Like I was having a very hard time picking out anything, and it's funny because it won Best Cinematography, and it is not as impressive as half of what we've watched so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and like I mean, it's a spectacle movie, and to some extent, those movies used to win a lot, like the Cleopatras and the Greatest Story Ever Told and Ten Commandments and but like is there a moment in this cinematography wise that I'm like has any glimpse of the Kubrick that we see every other movie?
You didn't see the last hour, and that's really where it picks up, which is why I was saying that it's kind of like a family restaurant with like a really good dessert. That's what I was trying to say there.
I thought you were saying Gordon Ramsay because we got Kubrick, like it's Gordon Ramsay. I thought you meant like we have a master chef here making family friendly cuisine. So I misunderstood that part. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, because I mean, for me, it really like the end is really visceral, and I really like, and I know Mike, you haven't finished it yet, but the contrast between Laurence Olivier's character Crassus and Spartacus at the end, because Spartacus is just, to me, he's a really important historical figure, but the character is sort of one dimensional to me.
Yes.
And Crassus is not, and at the end, you're like identifying even a little bit with Crassus, because it's like, what would I do if I were in that situation? I'd probably do what he's doing and crush this slave rebellion. I don't know. That's the way I felt. So it wasn't, you know, it kind of felt like,
Can I use that quote when we're promoting this podcast?
What quote?
Wes Wennerstrom says, "I would probably crush a slave rebellion." Every once in a while on my other podcast, I'll tell we have a producer now that like cuts clips, and I'll be like, make sure you get Matthew saying that. I want a clip of that.
But before the family restaurant thing, I mean, I think that the studio system lent a lot to this one because it was like wall to wall great actors, but it really limited. It was just too much shit happening, you know, and it needed to like kind of be pared down so Kubrick could do his thing.
Yeah, it's also the only one of his movies that he semi shares a director.
Yeah, Anthony Mann directed the first like 5 minutes of it, I think.
Yeah,
where they're in Libya, you know, those scenes.
Yeah, I thought that this was one of those ones where, like, for Kubrick, my thought on Kubrick is always the technical and the story is not there. That's how I think of him, is like there's not much story, but there's a lot of technical beauty, audio and video, and like both visual and audio. But like this was kind of the opposite for me. Like I thought there was a strong story, like it hit beats, you know, the way like a story structure would. I also thought it was interesting that we get like this might be the Kubrick part of it, and maybe, you know, but like this movie, the fact there's a few things in this movie that I'm like, Jesus, I can't believe this got made in 1960. Well, like the bath scene with Tony Curtis and was it Krakus?
So apparently that didn't make it into the cuts for the 60s audiences. And I heard this is crazy. So they didn't have Laurence Olivier's voice when they re-released it. So guess who did his fucking voiceover? Anthony Hopkins.
Really?
He did an impression of Laurence Olivier. So they could include that in the modern cut.
Okay, that makes more sense, because there was a point at which I was like, I know the Romans and the Greeks, there was a lot of gay relationships, but it's a 1960 movie. Even Kubrick's not going to get away with this. And then like it was pretty like homoerotic.
Yeah. Apparently the gay community loved this movie.
Oh yeah, and it was not a bad that's the other thing, was it was not like a bad portrayal of it. But when he says that, when he's talking about the oysters and the snails, and he's like, do you think that oysters are moral and snails are immoral? And he's like, no. And then he says, I like both oysters and snails. I'm like, like you could not be any more blatant in 1960. And you had Laurence Olivier saying that, and maybe this is just a piece of trivia that I know that doesn't make any sense, but Charles Lawton, who was the other senator that was kind of plotting against Crass. The names are very hard for me to remember. I'm sorry, but I remember Spartacus. But he was the most openly secret, closeted person in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Hollywood. He would literally have him and his husband or boyfriend or whatever they referred to each other as at the time would have lots of like parties, and people would come over, and so like you have that. You also, and then you get the you have him hired in there, and it was funny because every time when they were talking about, oh, you have a lust for women, the way he would say, yes, I do, I was like, oh, that does, like, that I can tell this guy's gay, like, by like watching this.
There was also the scene that I thought was really interesting, was the scene where where Crassus first gets introduced, and the women pick out the slaves to fight. Like where they're like, I'll take the big black one, and like let them wear just enough for modesty. Like it's like it felt like watching women on like a bachelor party, but like in this disgusting way.
Yeah,
just like,
but also for 1960, for a white woman on screen to be like, I'll have the big half naked beautiful black man,
right,
was like, that was, you know, that's intense too.
Yeah, it might have been that just back then people had more of a like kind of just a not like an interest in seeing what those social mores were and more forgiving of it, that it wasn't
Maybe.
like being portrayed in the modern day. I don't know.
That's true. And Othello was being played quite, Othello's, there's lots of versions of Othello back then. So like the idea of a black lover to a white woman isn't completely, but it was never a black guy playing it.
Yeah.
And so like having an actual black man playing a black man and then being described that way by a white woman, I just thought that was.
It's also interesting. Like, I think this might have been a way of getting around the censors. Sort of was that all of those interactions are the bad guy being, super, the bad guy's the bisexual one, or the, evil women are the ones that are leering after the black guy. Like there's a sense of, you don't see there's some homoeroticism with Spartacus, but like it's a little less blatant and less, spoken. So where, they could, kind of pretend that was, a mistake, where the bad guys are portrayed as these, overly sexual, omnisexual characters.
Yeah, exactly, omnisexual. Because with Spartacus as the slave, they kept like kind of inspecting his body, and they were like, "Oh, look at his muscle tone," and he was all bronzed up, and then, Kirk Douglas, like, how do you describe that face? Like, it's just, it's indescribable. I don't know. And he's like wearing that like diaper thing, and he's like, it's just like it's really homoerotic.
He's painting him, and he's like,
it's crazy. It's
staring straight forward. Oh, it's like very.
It's crazy to watch this movie and realize probably some makeup, but like also he's just got such leather skin.
Yeah,
and that movie's 65 years old almost, and he died like 3 years ago. At 100, how did you get to be 104 years old?
He looked like he was 104-year-old.
I know, and I don't know how old Spartacus is supposed to be in the story.
Young, yeah.
But he's 44 or 45 years old when that movie was made.
Wow.
I looked like he was born in 1916, and that movie came out in 1960. So he's like 44.
Yeah,
maybe 43, depending on how far ahead they shot it. But like, that's older than all of us, and like he, and then he lived another 60 years.
Crassus is, he's like goes both ways, but he's way more into Rome. So would you say he was Romosexual?
All right.
That's gonna be the quote that I'm gonna put on T-shirts for this podcast.
Nice. I'm a Romosexual.
I thought this was it's a pretty interesting movie. I think it's a good movie. Like I like this a lot. I think it's not the best of Kubrick or anything like that. And
it's the most like popcorn film of his, though.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. For sure. And but I think it's really interesting as like sort of a sliding door scenario for him. Like you can definitely see that Kubrick would have been really capable of doing this sort of thing. He would have been, he could have. I think this is actually probably like one of the best of like this sort of like sword and sandals type movie. Like the Ben-Hurs and
religious
like
epics.
This did not get nominated for Best Picture. It was the year that The Apartment came out.
Yeah.
I looked but this is a year before Ben-Hur.
Right.
And this is such a better movie than Ben-Hur.
Right. And
Ben-Hur is more historically known, though, I feel like, than this film.
Right.
But there's a lot of truth in this, though.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I think it's I think it's just really interesting that like it feels like if he had just been a little bit more like, cool with not having complete creative control, or like more collaborative. I think he was a really collaborative person, but like more collaborative in the ways that work in a studio system. Yeah. He would have been like, he could have just done this the rest of his career and probably would have had a pretty successful career, kind of going into some different stuff later on. But like, it's just really interesting to look at this and kind of see like how, the DNA of this, how he, being able to do all of this like management of a big production like this helps with something like 2001 or Barry Lyndon, which are kind of the same kind of movie. Like they're big, epic films, but doing something completely different with them,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he learned a lot from doing this.
Right, right.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to point out too, and this is this was to me what made this set this apart from like a Ben-Hur or those Sword and Sandal movies.
Yeah.
Was so you start off the opening narration literally talking about the end of American slavery, essentially, with the 2,000 years before the end of all slavery, even though we now know that's not really true.
Right.
But like it's clearly referring to American slavery, and then you go from there to showing slavery in a way that I think probably did a good job of humanizing how terrible it was. Like in the moment when him and the black guy are sitting in the box, and instead of watching his friend and the other guy fight, you're just watching them looking at each other and trying not to look at each other, realizing they have to kill each other in a few minutes. That like I don't think that happened in other movies. Like now we see stuff like that in movies, but like in those times you didn't see where like we're not looking at the action, we're looking at we're being shown visually the inner workings of someone's brain just based on performance and not based on dialogue, not based on like I thought that scene was the part of the first half where I was like, holy shit, like this is horrific. This is that it did more to tell that story than so far anything else I've seen. Although I think the movie is strong in its performances. But
I think that's kind of true. I feel like like you see something a little bit later. I mean, I think it's interesting. This came out in like 1960. Right when things are getting
Jim Crow was ending.
Yeah, and you get some things in cinema where you're getting more like essentially interesting films. You have the French New Wave starting. You have
what's that?
You mentioned the Apartment came out, like that comedy with a suicide attempt in it, and then you get this I think having that like sense of humanity in the historical scale, and I think there's historical epics that do that well, but I don't think to your point to this level. And then you see something like a few years later like Lawrence of Arabia, that's like all they're doing. It's this big historical epic, scale on that scale, but it's a very human story at the center of it driving it. You can't, you can't escape that. And I feel like that makes it, I feel like this is a little bit more influential than it gets credit for.
I was going to say, this
movie, can I just say this real quick? This movie was also the end of the blacklisting.
Right.
It literally ended not at the same time. It was this movie that ended the Hollywood blacklist.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Because John F. Kennedy crossed the picket line and he actually went to see it. And Donald Trumbo, who was the writer, he was chosen by Kirk Douglas to make it. And Kirk Douglas was like, "No, I'm not going to give him a pseudonym. We're going to do this." Yeah. So it literally was a huge turning point.
Yeah. I did not know that. That's pretty cool. What I was going to say is, with Lawrence of Arabia, with Lawrence of Arabia, Lawrence of Arabia, I'm pretty sure is from Friends. They did the Phoebe Buffay's sister episode, but anyway, Freudian slip there. Went with Lawrence of Arabia, which I think it's one of my favorite epics of all time. I wonder if it could have gotten made without this movie. Whereas, like, when we talk about Ben-Hur could have gotten made 20 years earlier, probably, if assuming technological ability and budget. And it could have gotten made 20 years later pretty easily. But, like, to get those movies where, like, Lawrence of Arabia, even though it's got its, lots of not white characters played by white people, other than that, it's like it is such a good film. It tells. You never seen it before?
No.
Okay, buckle down for 5 hours. It's the story. It's World War I, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's the story of a British guy going to like basically help arm one side of Arabs against the Turks, I think. And he, you know, kind of, I hate the term, I just don't know another term, but like they would, you know, he goes native, and you know, really sides with them, and
yeah,
and
and
so,
it deals with kind of the issues of that in a pretty direct way. Like there's a scene where like literally it's like someone disrobes him and they're like, "Look how pale you are. You're not an Arab." You know, like this you're cosplaying essentially.
Yeah,
and yeah, so I think it's ahead of its time. You know, but I think also, you know, again to your point, has some.
You get Obi-Wan in brownface, but other than that, not blackface, brownface, but
yes.
All right, so Spartacus. Yeah, I am excited to see the rest of
it. The end is quite beautiful. And like we were talking about the scale of, I haven't seen Lawrence of Arabia, but I imagine it's huge scale with tons of people.
Yeah,
The last battle scene in Spartacus, there must be 10 to 20,000 people in that shot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really cool to see.
Yeah,
and it's definitely the beginning of you can see Kubrick's large scale geometric shapes and stuff. So it's very cool.
That, like shot of them going over all the dead bodies after the
dead
battle.
bodies.
Like,
yes,
like that felt very Kubrick to me, and it felt, you know, it also felt like you could even see kind of like going back to Gone with the Wind. It's very similar, you know, to that big shot in Gone with the Wind, but it feels like Kubrick's take on that, you know, so it feels very
it's very like a Renaissance painting almost.
Cool. I saw a lot of like Renaissance painting shots in this. I felt like there was a lot of that coming through.
Nice.
So speaking of that, we chose violence as the theme today, and all of his films are like super violent. Maybe not as much with Barry Lyndon, and maybe not Eyes Wide Shut, but I haven't seen that in a long time.
Eyes Wide Shut is different kind of violence from what I remember.
It's like emotional violence,
Emotional, okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, so our film is going to feature violence. So yeah, I mean, and is he one of the first people to really start to stylize his violence, like this kind of ultra violence on screen?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he's the first that I remember where we're seeing like blood splatter or spatter, and like, you know, like there's that scene, especially in Spartacus being in color. Maybe that's part of why it's standing out to me. But there's the scene when the black slave, after he refuses to kill Spartacus, jumps up on the thing, and Laurence Olivier like slices his back, and it's very fake looking blood, but it's that like pink paint is just like on his face, and you know, and so there's like, I think that there's a thing about violence where like it's not a big deal to kind of see like, oh, I shot you and your shirt is turning red. And it's another thing to see the blood on the person, and then it's yet another level to see the blood on the murderer. Like to see someone else's blood, because someone else's blood becomes almost like a transfer of the violence. And I feel like those things were out of the norm for back then. Like I think you might see me from across the room shoot you, or, you know, like a strangulation or something that was very over dramatic. What you would not see is something that, you know, blades and the disruption of the puncture of a body in a visceral way.
And Wes, I think like you used the word stylized, and I would kind of push back against that. I feel like what stands out to me with Kubrick, I think there is that ultra violence, you know, as he uses in Clockwork Orange, but like the violence is almost not stylized. Like I'm thinking of like the end of, you know, we called out the end of Paths of Glory. There's no like drama to the fact that they get shot. They just get shot, moan, and slump. Like that's very realistic. It doesn't give you the escape of stylized. And I think, Mike, to your point, like that blood splatter, it's like it has an effect on the person. It doesn't give that. It's not clean. It's not giving you any escape from it. This is violence. This is deadly. This is, you can't pretend this isn't happening, you know?
Right. And to your point about the not being stylized, when I think about, when I talk to people about Tarantino movies, and they're like, well, they're very violent. I'm like, yeah, but they're kind of violent in the way a Looney Tunes is violent.
Right.
I mean, there's blood, but like in Kill Bill, they cut off the arm and it's just a fountain. Right. And you're like, as much as that is
watched that, Mike, and we just started cackling because it just looks so ridiculous.
It does, but like, and same thing. I mean, Django has it like 5 times where you're like, that just fucking wouldn't happen.
Right.
And so like, there is it brings us a disconnect and gives us a we can have a little more pleasure or separation from like seeing Leonardo DiCaprio get like killed in like a crazy, because he's in Django when he's killed, we're like, oh, we can just enjoy that, as opposed to having to feel any kind of, oh fuck, we just watched a person die. And it really feels like, oh fuck, we just watched a person end another person.
Right.
And so there is none of that.
Yeah, so way more visceral than...
Yeah. And you see, even later in like Clockwork Orange, the movie is very stylized, obviously it has this very distinct visual. But then you see like the rape scenes. It's not stylized. It's like you're hearing this woman scream and watching this character, the main character, do these things. And you're just like, oh my God, this is, like it hurts you to watch it, but you can't look away. It's just that it almost makes it more violent that he's wearing like a clown mask when he's doing it,
singing in the rain. And
right.
One of the things that's really interesting about Kubrick is I don't really find a lot of symbolism in his films. So maybe that also kind of reaches out into talking about violence, is that you don't see like violence intimated toward, maybe like in the Shining with like the blood rushing out of the elevators. But you see it and it's very much part of the emotion of the film and ties directly to the plot, most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he is very much like, I think there's a sense of, what he wants you to feel rather than what he wants you to think, So with The Shining's a great example, there's all this imagery that you could read something into, probably like Room 237 is a documentary all about that. But when you watch that documentary, you're kind of walking around like, these people are crazy. You're just talking about a horror movie that's making you feel weird. And I think
a bizarre film.
Right.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it in so long, and I'm very excited to rewatch it. Especially, I'm pretty close to the end of the book, and I'm like, oh, this is so much different than I remember the movie being. So like, I'm interested in seeing like what I just missed because I was like 17 and like wasn't paying attention to the subtlety and what just genuinely isn't there.
Yeah, so we had a pre-production meeting.
Yeah. So well, let's real quick, if for some reason you're joining us second episode in and you decided to skip the first episode, we're making a short film. We're making 3 short films that will become 1 short film, and we're doing that kind of, I wouldn't say entirely in the style of, but in some form of homage to Stanley Kubrick and the things that we're learning by watching these movies. So, sorry, go ahead now.
Yeah, and so we did a storyboard, which I did using the AI program Midjourney. So it took me a while. A lot of the stuff that generates just didn't relate to what I wanted to do at all. It was just really, some of the stuff was really strange. But I managed to do it. I set a little music to it, and it was really so we could get an idea of the pacing of everything. And just have a general idea of how long it's going to be. What we're doing is this kind of in the same ballpark, just to kind of match the tone of everything. So yeah, it sort of worked as an exercise. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I'm going to have to change just based on logistics from what my original script is. I don't have access to all the things that I was hoping to, but I'm going to just transition. But like, it was cool seeing, like, I think one of the best. So there's a shot in my screenplay which is in a cubicle, and the shot that Midjourney created for that is hilariously ridiculous because they are almost touching tips. They're so close in that cubicle, because it knew what a cubicle was, and then it puts two morbidly obese men into the cubicle with like the slightest little like desktop between them. Their knees like are practically in between each other's, and it's just like, what on earth is this?
I did not say to do that. I was like a guy talking over a cubicle to another human, and then it came up with that. And I was like, okay, I don't know why you did that, but
and also the cubicle is not like a standard size cubicle. It looks like it's about like 3 feet wide versus, you know, a standard like 10 foot by 10 foot or anything like that. So it's just like, they're just like jammed in there very claustrophobically.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that Wes really put in two guys scissoring
we're getting that, you know, sexual tension that we saw in Spartacus. And
there you go.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. And the two guys that I've cast for those two parts are would probably go way over the top with it if I asked them to. So
nice.
I've done most of my casting, and we have production dates as well. So
excellent
for my segment.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I'm getting there. I've got a few of my friends aligned. Just got to find the dates. So feels good. I'm really excited for this.
Are you casting the baby?
Maybe. I can talk to Bonnie. That would be cool.
You can just put her in a little rat mask.
Oh, hey, I got this for my set today. Check it out. It's like a sticker with all the Kubrick guys on it.
Oh, that's cool.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm going to put that on the refrigerator in the guy's apartment and like kind of do like they did in Clockwork Orange with the 2001 record.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, so, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll throw something in there. I have I think I have Dr. Strangelove on DVD downstairs. So
nice.
So maybe I'll throw that into one of the scenes.
Also, I got this. Check it out.
It's gonna be a dildo.
Check out my cool stuff, guys. It's the original DVD collection.
Oh yeah, I used to have that. I
think we all used to have this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen Barry Lyndon, and I started Lolita and I never made it through, but I've never seen Barry Lyndon, which is my most excited one. And when I watched Paths of Glory on Tubi, because it's free on Tubi if you are listening along and want to watch. Yep. Barry Lyndon's also free on Tubi, so I was like, cool. I'm
excited for you to watch Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon's my favorite, so
watching a lot of cinematography stuff over the years, like on YouTube. I'm like, why did I miss Barry Lyndon? Like Barry Lyndon seems like the one that is the most interesting story behind the cinematography. With let's just do all these candles and no time inappropriate or period inappropriate lighting is just an absolute crazy feat to accomplish.
We'll get to it, but I mean, like, oh my god, like he had to like invent stuff for that movie.
He worked with NASA for it.
NASA,
so cool.
He had a good relationship after he faked the moon landing.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Exactly.
Should we? I think maybe when we get to 2001, we should talk about the moon landing, like, because that's the other thing is he's had a crazy cultural impact. Like, it's funny because you talk to some people and like that aren't big movie people and they're not going to know who Stanley Kubrick is. Then you're like, the guy who directed 2001, and they'll be like, oh, the guy who faked the moon landing.
Yeah,
and you're like, no, but cool.
And there's also there's a QAnon subset that thinks Eyes Wide Shut is indicating things, and there's a lot of conspiracies around his work, which
interesting.
I do want to say so. I don't, Wes, let us know when you have to go, by the way.
That's
right. But I saw, this is 4 or 5 years ago, because I follow a lot of stuff like this on Instagram, and Stanley Kubrick's official Instagram, blue check mark, Stanley Kubrick official, and it had a blue check mark, came up as suggested to me, and I'm like, how? How does Stanley Kubrick have a blue check mark? He's been dead for 20 years. At this point, it was at least 18 or 19 years. And Instagram's what, 2012, maybe 2009 or 8 at the absolute earliest. And I'm like, he'd been dead for 10 years. How would they? And I'm like, is it his daughter? Like, what is going on here? And I have not.
You got to find the real Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah,
I think his daughter. His daughter's on social media. I know she was on
Twitter. Foundation.
Yeah, but I think it's just like the archive runs that. But
yeah, but that's they should like be a little more.
Yeah,
I genuinely was like, did someone fake enough stuff to get blue check marked on here? Like, but yeah. All right, so Pat, you have what have you done on yours? Because I think we kind of both touched on.
Yeah. So I'm doing a little something different from you guys, stylistically. But I have done a lot of, so I'm doing a series of, sort of still photographs based on, that's connected to a story like Chris Marker's La Jetée, similar style to that. And, mostly what I've been doing is kind of working on a script and then taking a lot of, as I've been going around, I went to Italy earlier this month, and just as I've been like walking my dog and stuff like that, taking a lot of photographs and, trying to, ideate parts of the story based on them. So I think it's moving along nicely. I've been kind of testing, how to I have no technical expertise in terms of movies, so I'm figuring out as I go. But figuring out how to put those things together and edit them together in a way that's going to work, and again, putting together a script and a story. So it's moving along. I think mine's a little bit, I think, easier in the sense of I don't have to do like coordinate with a bunch of people to have a shooting schedule or anything like that. It's kind of off the top of my dome,
I do have a thought for yours. This is something I wanted to do so bad with a short film I tried to make about 15 years ago, and now I know how to do it, and I did not know how to do it then. But I think something that would be cool with that same La Jetée style is, and maybe it's just one sequence, is and you need to be well lit so that you can use a fast shutter speed to get really clear pictures. For you'd probably want really clear pictures, and then instead of shoot shoot video. And then edit it so instead of us seeing 24 frames a second, you're seeing one frame for a second, and then it's like you're saying, okay, the first frame of every second, we're just pulling that frame and actual motion. Like I think that would look really cool. I'm not sure what the if you shot that, I'd help you edit that because you'd want to play around with like what's the best, especially depending on the action, what's the best frame rate to go with there, but I think that could be cool.
Yeah,
Mike,
I remember you working on a short or talking about a short where you would do that, and I remember that specifically because I saw La Jetée like right after that, and I was like, that's kind of like what Mike was talking about doing.
I think I saw La Jetée and was like, I want to do something similar, but this is like I think a chase that maybe it was in the final chase scene of that or something, but like where it's like every second you get that frame and you see the frame. It's no black, but so it feels like you're just watching a really slow thing, but it's jumping ahead. It's not it's not like you're just watching it slow down. It's going at the same speed on whether if it's a minute long clip, it takes a minute. But it's 60 frames over that course of that minute instead of 360 frames.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you want to play with it because maybe you do want a little motion blur. Yeah. Maybe you don't. I'm not sure. It depends on you. That would come down to what you think you want visually, and then you tell me, and I will help you figure out how to accomplish that.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I think it's I'm interested to see sort of experiment a little bit because I think there's things like in La Jetée, like there's that one part of it where you're looking at a woman and then she just starts moving and it's like kind of shocking among all those still photographs. So like, where do I want to play that in, or do I want to kind of stick to something a little bit more still?
Do our listeners know what La Jetée is? Should we describe it real quick and then wrap up?
Well, we can describe it. I'll try to find a link, and when we post this, I will put the link in the show notes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I can describe it, and we can do that, because it's a half hour long, I think, and it's like one of the great, short films of all time.
Also, inspiration for 12 Monkeys.
Yes, yeah. So it's directed by Chris Marker, great, filmmaker of the late 50s, 60s, and beyond. But it is a story of a time traveler who goes back to. I don't remember the exact story, but it's sort of going back in time to save the
Charles
world.
de Gaulle Airport is what I remember.
Right,
but...
right. It's a very complex story. 12 Monkeys simplifies it, but is still kind of inscrutable. But it is shot in this style where it's all still photographs, put together to tell this story, with narration and dialogue going on over it. My kind of idea about my film is, one, Stanley Kubrick was a great photographer, and two, I mentioned in the first episode, he was kind of like the first artist for me. Like, he opened up a whole world of cinema and beyond to me, and so he's really important to me in that sense. But at a certain age, I kind of felt like I moved past him, and one of the artists I moved towards was Chris Marker. One of the artists I moved to was Michelangelo Antonioni, who did some similar stuff in L'Éclise. So kind of capturing sort of the influence Kubrick has had in the ways that I've explored cinema since then.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah. Also, and La Jetée is available on YouTube, but I will link that in the show notes.
Yeah. Also, a great Criterion collection if you're a physical head. Mm-hmm. It's worth buying.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great. Sans Soleil is one of my favorites ever. So.
Yeah, fantastic documentary.
All right. You guys want to wrap it up? Do you have anything to plug? Or right. So I want to just say that one of the things that I think we've decided we're gonna do. So if you're listening to this, I'll cut it out if we don't do this. But if you want to listen to the entire season. Right now, it will be available by the time this comes out. If you go onto our Patreon, you'll be able to buy the whole season. I will have links to that in there. You'll also be able to buy our short film, which or access to our short film, which will all come in a bundle. And we will make it reasonably. It will not be crazy priced. It'll just be to kind of help.
Only $1,000.
No, yeah. Probably I'm thinking $10 for the entire season, all the behind the scenes stuff that we make, and the short film, all on the day that the first episode airs, or maybe even before the first episode airs, will be available there.